Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Autism Research Coalition. Today, we are very fortunate to have Keith Bell with us. Welcome, Keith.
Hi, Jessica. Hello, everybody.
So we're very excited to have you. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I'm just going to give a little bit of a background regarding you, and then you can take us on the journey. We're going to walk through some gut club, just talk about some amazing points and things that you have come up with. So yes, we're excited. So for everyone who doesn't already know, Keith founded the Gut Club in 2016 to create awareness about the importance of intestinal health to personal and environmental health to provide support for treatment and prevention of metabolic disease. In 2018, he published the children's book, I Wonder What It's Like to Be a Raindrop, the Rain-Making Bacteria. Today, Keith will provide an overview of the relevant research about the importance of the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes balance and ways to enhance protective bacterial species in the gut. Thank you, Keith. Please take it away.
Great, Jessica. We're going to be treading some deep water today, so I hope everyone will have a bit of mercy here. There's especially all the statisticians out there and microbiome experts. This is not easy stuff. And there are no easy answers either. So, I've been on a journey myself studying these things for, gosh, it's been about 11, almost 12 years now. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I had a dog with a seizure disorder, and this is back beginning at the end of 2008, and gut origin of seizure was not on the map, but we suspected it strongly. Actually, my son Kyle pointed out that her belly was red, and that started to make me think about the connection between the gut and the brain. So this is before there was not much research. There's been an explosion of research, though. So a lot of my thoughts actually came true, and we were able to control her horrific seizure clusters by treating her gut, not just her brain. Unfortunately, 8 veterinarians and a neurologist were only able to offer treatment from the neck up. So it's interesting that the field of epilepsy is also a pretty large part of autism. I think in the worst cases of autism, I've read up to half of them also can suffer a seizure disorder. So this has been a good platform for me to learn about gut-brain axis. Today, we're going to talk about microbial balance, which is not just a matter of personal health, but also planetary health. Maybe at the end, we'll talk a bit about how microbial balance is related to whether or not it rains or snows and controlling climate. So it's a planetary issue, not just a personal issue. Also, the global burden of autism happens to be, I've seen figures of 70% suffered in the developing world. And that's really an astounding figure when you think about it. Why would 70% of autism, ASD, be suffered in the developing world? And that points toward environmental issues like environmental toxicity and how that affects gut flora balance and therefore the gut-brain axis. So that's just an interesting fact. Today, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour. This is not going to be your standard PowerPoint presentation. I decided to show you some of the work of the Gut Club over the last 5 years, some of the pertinent photo explorations, as I call them. They're basically choosing important subjects and then delving into them as a community. It's really an interactive community, the Gut Club. Part of what we do is the Gut Club stool test discussion group. That's our private group page where we've got almost 8,000 people now, and a few thousand of them are pretty active, posting charts and offering what I like to call impactful suggestions of support. We're all in this business of trying to interpret stool test results, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. There are a lot of doctors out there that might take a quick glance at a stool test result and say, looks good to me, whereas I might look at it and say, it's pretty obviously showing gut dysbiosis. So I hope that today you can walk away with a better understanding of what to look for in a stool test result. By all means, please, if you're not already a member, please join us the Gut Club Stool Test Discussion Group on Facebook. We also have the main page on Facebook. There's also the gutclub.org on the World Wide Web. So why don't we dive in? This picture you see on your screen is posted in timeline photos on the Gut Club Facebook page. So you'll be able to refer back to this later. I've compiled a lot of different links. We're going to be going back and forth. Hopefully it won't make you too dizzy. So why don't we get into it? We're going to be talking about the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio and protective bacteria. The first photo I'd like to show you is what to look for in a stool test. And these are the major phyla of human gut microbiota, or rather bacteria. There's also, of course, fungi, protozoans, bacteriophages, that's healthy viruses, and the microbiome is a diverse place. But today we're going to be focusing more so on bacteria. We'll get into fungi a little bit as well. But here we see that most of the populations of bacteria in the human gut, in most samples, because the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio does not necessarily apply to many conditions, including autism. And I want to make that qualification early on, because in a healthy gut, the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes populations combined can be 90% or more of the results in a stool test. That can change, though. When we're talking about autism, that doesn't necessarily apply. We've seen half of all results come in as proteobacteria in autism. We've seen extremely high levels of actinobacteria, mainly bifidobacteria, in autism. So that Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio, here we see, it might be around 70% Firmicutes and 25% Bacteroidetes in a sample. But in some autism cases, we've seen in the group page, and also when we look at the literature, we see there's no real consistency. It can really be quite a broad range of results. So what it really does, though, in terms of importance, the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio really can't be underestimated, because it gives us a template of what a healthy gut is really all about, what microbial balance is. And this generally describes it, this chart. There are many people out there that would say, well, we just don't know what a healthy microbial balance is. I like to differ. I beg to differ. We do, based on all the literature. When you read it over the years, it starts to clarify. And there have been in years past a lot of focus being placed on microbial diversity, biodiversity, as a key factor in health. But diversity is not all it's cracked up to be. In fact, we'll learn later, if we get to it today, that in the autism gut, diversity is actually higher than in the healthy gut. It's just that what's missing are protective bacteria. A lot of this was promoted by the research about the Hadza, a tribe in Africa, and how their microbial diversity exceeded that of most people on Earth. When you look a little bit closer, you find that maybe that diversity is not such a good thing after all, because the infant mortality rate and child mortality rates are skyrocketing. And unfortunately, they recently succumbed to vaccination rather than looking at the real cause of those missing microbes, and which in my view is poor sanitation. That's what I call real immunity. Poor, things like nutrition, improving sanitation, the microbial balance, that's real immunity. When you talk about adding vaccines, the topic of the day, That's really an artificial type of immunity. So in my view, we need to focus more on microbial balance, and that means improved nutrition, sanitation, and things like that. So let's look at the group page for a second. I want to show you this example. Let's see here. I thought I had it up already. Maybe I didn't. Let's go to the Gut Club stool test discussion group real quickly. Jessica, that you see the screen, right? Okay. Do you see this new picture?
I do.
Okay, great. I want to make sure my screen is being shared properly. This is the cover photo from the Gut Club stool test discussion group. It comes from 2016, when we were just starting out, actually. And this is an example of an autism gut where 46%, 46.55% of the results from this uBiome test, that company was put out of business by the United States government. That's another story. Anyway, we're promoting a couple other tests on the Gut Club pages. We work with both BiomeSite and also Thrive. They've really done a good job taking uBiome technology to new levels. And we look at this autism gut proteobacteria, 46.55%. That's crazy high. And because of this result, the parents were able to make a decision to use fecal microbiota transplant, which did balance this problem. FMT. Everyone here is probably familiar with the work of Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams has focused partially on the Bacteroidetes side of things, where he found in his results that Prevotella was raised. Let me back up here. Bacteroidetes is generally divided between Bacteroides and Prevotella. There's also allostypes, for instance, but most of Bacteroidetes would be Prevotella or Bacteroides. And the FMT research of Dr. Adams showed that Prevotella was raised even 2 years post FMT. That's pretty important because Prevotella is extremely important when it comes to gut-brain communication. We'll talk a bit about that. You know what? Before we go on, I want to show you this. What we're really talking about here is the phylum level of taxonomic ranks. Okay, this basically describes all of life, and as you can see, the ranks go down from larger to smaller, all the way down to species. But when we're talking about this this chart, we're looking at different phyla, and the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes phyla are the most prominent in the healthy gut. So that's why I think it's really important to focus. It's probably the first thing that I look at when we look at stool test results, the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio. Some people don't put a lot of stock in it. I do, because for one thing, it makes things easy to understand. When you look at the Firmicutes side, that is largely the gram-positive bacteria, which includes the butyrate producers. And we'll talk about why butyrate is so important. Also, Lactobacillus are part of Firmicutes. And I happen to be a Lactobacillus freak, I like to call myself. I used to like saying that bifidobacteria are the Rolls-Royce of the microbiome. Now I like to add that if bifidobacteria are the Rolls-Royce, lactobacilli are the Lamborghinis of the microbiome. That's new. Send me an invoice for listening. So the Firmicutes are the gram-positive butyrate producers, and the Bacteroidetes are largely gram-negative bacteria, and they produce lipopolysaccharides, LPS, which is a type of sugar that's actually the cell wall of these gram-negative bacteria, and that can cause a pretty powerful immune response. When you've probably heard about cytokine storm in relationship to COVID-19. that can be started by lipopolysaccharides. In fact, it's been shown, although not really concentrated on much in most circles, but we know that the SARS-CoV-2 virus actually can bind lipopolysaccharides and also bind TLR4, which is used by LPS to signal the immune system. And it just so happens that proteobacteria, we saw 46% proteobacteria in that autism sample, is also able to bind SARS-CoV-2. And so that speaks largely towards what I would call a microbial predisposition to suffering COVID-19 symptoms. It divides those that are asymptomatic versus those that suffer symptoms. I believe there's going to be some new science put out soon by Dr. Sabine Hazan about this issue of microbial predisposition to COVID. Also, Martin Blaser, who's really well known, he wrote the book Missing Microbes, and his lab is working on that as well. We at the Gut Club also concentrate on microbial predisposition to adverse vaccine reaction. And that's a big issue in my view when it comes to autism. What if there are missing microbes at the time of vaccination that leads to a skewed immune response and a gut-brain axis that is compromised, leading to inflammation and damage? So I would like to think that in the future we'll see stool testing being routine for mothers and infants prior to vaccination to assess the risk of an adverse reaction. That's the general idea. Okay, let's go back to our main page here. And, we talked about Prevotella and Bacteroidetes as part of Bacteroidetes. Prevotella and Bacteroides being the main bacteria in that phyla of Bacteroidetes. And this was kind of shocking that when people move to this country, this is a migrant study, their Prevotella is lowered and their Bacteroides are raised. When I say this country, I mean the United States, of course. And by the way, I'm in South Florida, Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County, from Palm Beach County with love today. So how interesting. What would explain that Prevotella is lost by these migrants and Bacteroides are raised? This could actually explain things like the migrant issues with possible vaccine injury and high rates of autism in the Somali immigrants of Minnesota. In fact, this study was done in Minnesota. Okay. Bacteroides are really important. This is a beautiful photo of a study that was just released a few months ago. And I like this picture a lot. Here's a child with apparently healthy cognition and language skills. And the study is about protective Bacteroides. And when they're missing, how that can be an issue. And in fact, what we're seeing in other studies is reduced Bacteroides, for instance, in cesarean section. And what would cause that? Well, the authors of that study, which came out in late 2019, just before the pandemic, was focusing on antibiotics. It's just possible that this combination of antibiotics prior to vaccination should be considered a potential cause of autism. I interviewed Martin Blaser about that issue. Actually, we didn't get to the field of vaccination, but we talked about antibiotics associated with autism, and he was he concurred. Bacteroides are also really important for regulating the immune system. And one of the mechanisms is what's called polysaccharide A, PSA. This is there's a link you can go to this, and you can see how we operate on the Gut Club page. We post a photo from the research, and then underneath of it post comments, and hope to inspire public discussion of this issue.
Oh, it looks like I think we lost your mic, Keith. Yeah, it says that it's on. Maybe check your on the screen. It might be on mute. No, I still can't hear you. Let's see. It says on the thing that it's on mute. If you look down below, if you press maybe it's on mute, so you can press unmute. Let's see.
Somehow,
Perfect.
okay. Oh my gosh. Here in Palm Beach County, things can be a little iffy. Just kidding. Okay, so I'm not sure where my mic went out. I probably clicked that mute button by accident, but we're talking about protective Bacteroides and polysaccharide A and the research there, and how this is an example of a photo exploration of the Gut Club. We've got dozens of these where we post a photo from what I would consider profound literature, new research, and then have a discussion in comments and also post the related research. So that's one thing about Bacteroides that's important. The B. fragilis group is about 10 different types of Bacteroides, and there's been some focus at the Autism Research Coalition. I was really interested to see that Alex has been focusing on the issue of reduced Bacteroides. We also have to focus on having too much of a good thing. It's possible to have very high amounts of Bacteroides, which can cause problems. In fact, that applies to almost any microbe, having too much of a good thing. But here we see 10 different species of Bacteroides that I would consider protective. However, there are toxigenic, enterotoxigenic forms of, for instance, Bacteroides fragilis that are associated with causing cancer. So, and the same can apply to E. coli, for example. E. coli, there are pathogenic, adhesive, toxigenic forms, but there are also important forms that are crucial to health. Okay. Oops. Let me go back to this. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, importance of Prevotella. This photo is about Prevotella actually leading to reduced inflammation, and by way of blocking Th17, that's like a master regulator in a sense of immune response, an inflammatory immune response. And Prevotella have this capability of blocking that. So that's pretty interesting. Although you can have too much Prevotella too. We've also seen in the stool test discussion group autism charts with very, very high levels of Prevotella. And that might be associated with neurotoxic short-chain fatty acids like propionic acid, propionate. That's been pretty well studied in the field of autism. High Prevotella might be caused by an immune response due to a virus or a protozoan that leads to that high level of Prevotella. So we're wrestling in the group these days about how to lower Prevotella. One of the ways, we talk about it in this photo exploration, is this association between fungi and Prevotella, and how there's this relationship between Candida and high levels of Prevotella. So perhaps one route to lowering Prevotella is to focus on lowering fungi. And how would you do that? Well, one way might be to raise Lactobacillus, because Lactobacillus also have a way of communicating with the immune system by way of what's called IL-22 to control fungi. So when I was watching, eagerly the information about Sporanox earlier this year, or was it late last year, that the coalition had Dr. Shaw and Dr. Baker on talking about high-dose Sporanox in order to balance high levels of Aspergillus fungi. I offered the suggestion that maybe raising Lactobacillus is going to be key here to have a healthy immune response that controls fungi. Lactobacillus also are crucial for gut-brain communication by way of the vagus nerve, and actually have the ability to raise oxytocin receptors in the brain. That's pretty mind-boggling. And what's oxytocin all about? It's about love, social interaction, immune response. That's pretty important. Okay, let's go on to a couple other things about Bacteroides. Bacteroides are also responsible for healthy lipids, which are also known to be protective against COVID. In fact, there are a few examples now of Bacteroides being crucial for healthy immune response and also limiting SARS-CoV-2 infection. That's pretty profound information. One of the routes might be sphingolipids. Jessica, can you say sphingolipids? I'm sure you can.
I can try.
Yeah, try to say sphingolipids. Yeah, it's very fun. Try to say it 3 times fast. Just kidding, you don't have to. Okay, so anyway, sphingolipids. Dr. Ruth Ley, who's one of my favorite researchers, has been concentrating on sphingolipids. She's now with Max Planck. Some interesting stuff about how host inflammation goes down when we have larger levels of bacterial sphingolipids, which are mainly produced by Bacteroides. The host also can produce sphingolipids, and that can cause a problem. But to balance that, we need bacterial sphingolipids. I'm barely scratching the surface here. A lot of what I do on the Gut Club is basically learning aloud and basically cataloging these things so I can go back and relearn what I've forgotten. There's a lot to look at. Bacteroides also were found, amazingly, to reverse autism-like behavior in mice. This is a pretty early report from 2013. How could a single species, which was B. fragilis, attenuate autistic symptoms? That might be a matter of the polysaccharide A that we talked about earlier. There are a few other mechanisms as well. We also talked a bit about B. fragilis being pathogenic. So again, you can have the wrong species. There are a lot of stool tests that can actually help find the actual species, as opposed to the 16S tests. They don't go they go to species, but not to strain level, and that's important when we're trying to find things like these pathogenic forms of E. coli and B. fragilis. Okay, let's talk about why we know that the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio should be, for a healthy gut, in most populations, higher in Firmicutes than Bacteroides, or than Bacteroidetes. There are some people that still believe that Bacteroidetes should be dominant, but I don't think they've taken a deep enough dive into the literature, because there are examples showing that, here's a nice photo actually. The composition in the United States, this was a study done with about 3,400 people, and they showed that Firmicutes, in 3,400 healthy people, they showed that Firmicutes was higher than Bacteroidetes. So this is something to look for. When we look a little bit further, this is a breakdown from a Japanese study. I I spotted this in supplementary materials. It was a great day to find this, because we see here that at the phylum level, Firmicutes is dominant in every country that they looked at, and the rest of it was a combination of Bacteroidetes and other bacteria. So what was interesting, I found, is that at the level of the genus, that's just above species level, all of them were high in Firmicutes, except the United States and China for the most part. And why would the Bacteroidetes be so much higher? In fact, it was Bacteroides, so much higher in the United States and China. And I'm wondering if it's not a matter of environmental toxicity, because in all the other countries, Bacteroides were lower than Firmicutes. So looking at the Bacteroidetes, the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio is pretty cool. Okay, we looked at the different countries. Another issue is race, and this ratio is different based on race. Now, this is very controversial. In fact, I've only found one article so far about ethnicity and microbial balance associated with, at least one lay article. I mean, something you find in the news, where they question whether or not ethnicity was a factor in microbial balance leading to health disparities. I mean, with COVID, as an example, we know that, that the minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans are at much greater risk. And, what explains that? Maybe it's about this natural microbial predisposition. This one chart would be seen as very controversial, but there are other charts we can look at where in African Americans, Bacteroidetes were found to be significantly higher than Caucasians, where and Firmicutes were much higher. I think back to the days of Brian Hooker's work and the work trying to explain what the CDC arrived at, where African American boys were found to be at greater risk of autism by the MMR vaccine. Maybe this is what we should be concentrating on, are a greater risk of higher levels of gram-negative bacteria, and possibly leading to reduced levels of protective bacteria in some individuals. So we also can focus on sex, or gender, as you might call it. There are major differences between male and female microbiota. And, the world is still learning about this. In fact, I like to call microbiota the underlying beauty of diversity. And it applies to race, sex, geography, so, why are, autism rates so much higher in boys than girls? In this photo, we talk about that. This one we posted October 2017. Wow, it's October 29th, 2017. It's the 4-year anniversary of this photo being posted. I'm just noticing that. Okay, let's get into the autism gut. Okay, this is a study that is fairly new. It's this year, and it's called Dysbiotic Gut Microbiota and Dysregulation of Cytokine Profile in Children and Teens with Autism Spectrum Disorder. I think I might have this already loaded. Yeah, I'll show it to you. Here we go. February 2021. And in this paper, they're showing that, unlike many other papers about the autism gut, they're showing that there are reduced protective bacteria, reduced Bacteroides, reduced butyrate producers, and reduced bifidobacteria, among others. That's pretty important. There may be higher diversity, but reduced protective bacteria in the autism gut. Let's see what else we have on this page here. I think we can, here's another paper. Let it load quickly. This was 2018 when, gut microbiota features in young children with autism spectrum disorder, where they were basically boggled. There were no differences seen. They couldn't really find a pattern. And sure enough, we don't see the pattern either in our stool test discussion group. It can be all over the board, but a common denominator we do see in every result is reduced protective bacteria. We have another thing here. This study found a lack of consistency. Again, this is February of 2020, a review of many different papers, and they couldn't find a pattern either in the autism gut. So it's an individual thing. That's why testing is so important. And, what was once seen as sterile is now, due to new technology, we see it's teeming with life. Even the brain has gut flora, or rather microbiota. In fact, alpha proteobacteria are known to be the dominant flora in the healthy brain. So welcome to the world of balanced brain flora. Okay, here's an issue where we're talking about stunted microbiota in cesarean section. And this is what I mentioned earlier, where missing were Bacteroides. That may be a matter of not being exposed to mom's poop in the birthing process. That's part of it. Or I suspect more so about antibiotics used in birth, which is pretty common also in things like group B strep. It's not just a C-section where antibiotics are used at birth. Maybe that will be changed in the future to using probiotics at birth. There's a lot of controversy about using antibiotics at birth. And based on what I see, stunted microbiota referring mainly to reduced Bacteroides. That's a big deal for us to discover. This was the 2019 paper that I mentioned earlier. Here's the actual paper. Well, no, I'm sorry. This is a different paper that found Bacteroides dominant gut microbiome of late infancy is associated with enhanced neurodevelopment. That's just a few months ago, June 2021. That seems pretty profound, especially when we consider missing Bacteroides, which have the ability to regulate our immune response. What else do we have here? We talked about predisposition to adverse vaccine reaction. This is one of the photos on Facebook that was not censored, thankfully. There are a lot of research papers published about about microbial regulation of immune response to vaccination, and none of them talk about adverse reaction, microbial relation of immune response associated with adverse reaction. They're all studying how to improve vaccine response based on microbes present. But that's been changed. Recently, a window has been left open in the latest review about microbial regulation of immune response to vaccination. There's a group led by Dr. David Lynn in Ireland who put out a beautiful review paper and focused on microbes and vaccines, and in the last two sentences implicated that this might be a matter of safety as well. So I look forward to this whole ball of wax opening up. Okay, baby's first bacteria. We started this in 2018. This was a special issue of Nature, but there's a lot of literature about colonization in the womb. And that's what this photo is about. Right now, we're up to 96 comments on this exploration. How interesting that there's still controversy about whether or not colonization begins in the womb. There's a lot of denialism out there, and a lot of proof that colonization does begin in the womb. It's called vertical transmission. This is a big deal also when it comes to pathogens. Even in the third world, malaria is a congenital disease. It can be transferred in the womb, and people are then having seizures based on that later in life. Okay, another issue is that the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio changes with age. This is a really fascinating area. So we didn't talk about age yet. In fact, this photo here says it all. The ratio is very low in infants because, again, diversity is not all it's cracked up to be. In infants, there's not much diversity at all. In fact, in the breastfed infant gut, it can be up to 80 or 90% bifidobacteria. That's not a diverse microbiome. And so we see here very low levels, very low Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio. It gets higher, when solid food is added. That's when Clostridia are able to flourish. This is called, the gut microbiota assembly of infants. So when we're adults, our Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio is high. But when we age, it gets low again. So we're losing these protective bacteria. Maybe the definition of aging is losing protective bacteria. In fact, by definition, if you're a centenarian, you have those protective bacteria. And that's according to the centenarian studies. We've got another photo about that, a compilation of centenarian microbiome studies. So how interesting that this Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio should be lowered over time as we age. So if we want to grow old and healthy, we need to concentrate on keeping our protective microbes high, and keeping this ratio high. Okay, one way to do it is butyrate. Okay, butyrate is produced by largely the Firmicutes. And, when you raise protective Bacteroides, actually, that affects butyrate production. Butyrate production is also about things like pH. That's a big factor. But here's why Firmicutes are so important. They are producing the butyrate that's required by the cells of the intestines, known as the colonocytes, and that signals them to mop up oxygen, and that lowers oxygen in the gut, where most of the pathogenic bacteria, or a large part of them, are aerobic. So we're promoting a butyrate supplement called Charbutyrin. You can find it on thegutclub.org. That's our main website. But raising butyrate is a key area, and one of the most important reasons the Firmicutes-Bacteroidetes ratio should be high. Not too high. Again, you can have too much of a good thing. We've got a lot of information here on this photo about butyrate and why it's so important. It's not just about oxygen. There's so much there. We could have in fact, a separate talk all about that. There was a shuddering study that was just published recently about preterm infants and brain injury. This was just published in April. And they found the proteobacteria Klebsiella was high in severe brain injury in preterm birth. That's very interesting. Whereas no brain injury was found in Enterococcus, Streptococcus being high. E. coli was also found to be at higher levels in a healthy infant gut. In fact, in E. coli are one of the first, if not the first, in gut microbiota assembly. It's an important thing. Okay, let's see what else we have here. There's a lot. We may have to stop early. Oops. Okay. All right. Hope this experiment's working well, as opposed to PowerPoint. Gives you a break to think for a little bit too. Okay. Oh yeah, here we are. Lactobacillus. We focus a lot on Lactobacillus bacteria. This is one of the first postings of the Gut Club in October 2016, October 23rd. So here we are 5 years later, still talking about this connection between lactobacilli activating the parasympathetic nervous system by way of the vagus nerve. This is a, whoops, darn it, I missed that. This is a photo of a drawing from 1543. How interesting. That's one of my favorites. So here we have a key gut-brain communication example. Actually, the gut is hardwired to the brain. There are these cells called neuropod cells, which are, are in the gut, and I believe they're part of the Peyer's patches, connected to the M cells. I have to review that myself, but the neuropods are hardwired from gut to brain. We have a photo about that too. Okay. Peyer's patches, by the way, is an area that we're focusing quite a lot on. I was learning about that after giving our dog that I mentioned an endoscopy rather than an MRI and a spinal tap. That's where I started learning about Peyer's patches. That's where our immune cells are born, the beginning of the lymphatic system in the gut, and how things can leave the gut, not just leaky gut, but that lymphatic system beginning in Peyer's patches of the gut opens the entire body to products of the gut by way of things like chylomicrons, which are little balls of fat, largely triglycerides. Lipids are, we mentioned earlier, those are regulated by gut microbes. Okay, let's see here. Lactobacillus, control of fungi. We talked about this earlier. This is about tryptophan metabolism and how tryptophan is used by lactobacillus to signal the AHR system, and how that leads to IL-22 to control fungi. So this is a photo exploration of that science. We actually have two different photos focusing on that dynamic. And it's one of the reasons I like to promote kefir, or do you say kefir? When it's fermented 48 hours, kefir is lactobacillus dominant. And it also has a very broad range of microbes. It's similar, in fact, probably more similar to human poop than any other food item that I can think of. But another food item that has a very unique microbiome, by the way, we could talk more about FMT a little bit later if you'd like. But another thing that has a very unique microbiome is arugula. I really like to focus on arugula as a high-dose food item. And a lot of people may have heard about the Walls protocol. Terry Walls is a doctor who developed this high-dose vegetable diet to reverse her multiple sclerosis. Well, it's being used worldwide by people addressing autoimmune conditions. More and more autism is considered an autoimmune condition, and beginning in the gut. So, what's interesting is that Dr. Walls attributes her success largely to greens. I would like to think that high-dose arugula could be considered a modified Wall's protocol. And if you were to eat, for instance, a full box of organic baby arugula a day, that you might be able to shift flora, starting small. In fact, any of the suggestions that we have today, or that anyone has for you, it's really wise to begin in very small doses. I can't say that enough. I learned the hard way with this dog, where even a probiotic caused seizure rapidly. You have to begin with very small doses to avoid an adverse reaction. So work your dose up. Arugula is interesting for a number of reasons. It has an analog of the precursor of sulforaphane called arusin. That's an interesting anti-inflammatory molecule. Also, probably the most important thing is, other than it being a low oxalate food, that's interesting, but it also tops the list. Get this, tops the list of all food items for nitrates. That is a precursor for nitric oxide, which our bodies use for a number of purposes, including the immune system being able to balance flora. So even higher than beets. I was really shocked to learn that arugula has higher nitrates even than beets. World-class athletes are drinking beet juice. They may want to start, using arugula juice combined with beets. That would be interesting before the race. How fascinating. So high nitrates. Personally, I find, that a high dose arugula diet helps me. I just turned 60 years old a few months ago, battling not any particular health condition, but metabolic syndrome for sure. So I find high dose arugula is a great thing for me. The purple potato is another thing that I like to promote. It is also high in non-protein nitrogens. We're back to nitrogen content. This might explain, between greens and tubers, those are some pretty healthy foods that are also high in nitrogen. And this is being a precursor to nitric oxide. That's all about, things like circulation and immune response. Nitric oxide is a pretty heavy, deep subject that I'm still learning about. There are, types of nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme that creates nitric oxide in the body that cause damage. So it's, there's more than one face of nitric oxide to learn about. But these are healthy forms. These types of potatoes also are associated with longevity in Japan. That's why they're called Okinawan sweet potatoes. And they're very high in certain polyphenols that are really crucial to health. We've got a couple photos about those. The types of polyphenols are things like proanthocyanidins. They're called PACs for short. Really interesting subject matter. High polyphenol diet is an important thing. Purple potatoes. I would say ditch your standard russets, even though they're delicious. And if you're going to eat potatoes, find the purple ones, inside and out. There's a reason that there are more centenarians in the world in Okinawa. They used to be like over 90% by weight in the late 1800s of the Okinawan diet. Okay, carrot soup is another cool subject matter. Carrots are, they were used by this doctor like over 100 years ago. This is, gosh, I forgot how long ago this was. But this Dr. Ernst Morrow was using carrot soup to tackle colic in infants. Kind of a precious photo here of this is the good doctor himself and an infant. Who would think carrot soup would be such a good thing? Well, the doctor probably could not have known that it raises bifidobacteria. Carrots are bifidogenic. In soup form, it's a better way to absorb that nutrition. In fact, I'm all for making soups, combined beef and chicken soups. You can make stocks. There are people that have reversed their health issues by using soup 100% of their diet. not just, you have to eat the meats too, but what's in soup, other than things like glucosamine, which are important for the gut, but there are amino acids. The amino acids are actually a huge part of health that are regulated by gut microbes. Are we wrapping this up now, Jessica? We have 2 minutes. Okay. Oh, I can't hear you now.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
No, I'm still listening to you. I have some good questions after when you're finished.
Okay, give me 2 minutes and we'll wrap it up, and then we'll go into questions. That'd be great. Amino acid balance is regulated by microbes. How fascinating! And they make them and break them. They make and break vitamins too. Yeah, especially the B vitamins, well known. In fact, if they make them, they also break them. So things like, scurvy, for instance, no one's talking about scurvy and vitamin C, the precursor, being broken by microbes. It's called DHA. It's the other DHA, not the omega fatty acid, but there's another DHA that's the precursor to vitamin C. How interesting. They were onto this in the research that ended in the late 50s, and there was one final paper in like 1962 about microbial degradation of vitamin C. But back to amino acids and making soup. Amino acids are the precursors to neurotransmitters in the gut. They actually are competing to cross the blood-brain barrier to form things like serotonin. Tryptophan is competing with other amino acids. That serotonin that's made in the gut, it's known as gut-derived serotonin, that can't cross the blood-brain barrier. Tryptophan does, though. Tryptophan metabolism is another very deep subject that's regulated by gut microbes, and it can turn toxic when things like quinolinic acid are at high levels in the gut, and how that leads to glutamate excitotoxicity. There's a lot to learn about that subject. Okay. Let's see if we're coming close to the end here. Oh, yeah. Mitochondria is another nice subject matter. Mitochondrial dysfunction, also about gut microbes. And LPS, actually, both outside the cell and inside the cell. These microbes are small enough to live inside of cells. They're doing the backstroke in the cytosol, which is like 70% water, the fluid in cells. They're doing the backstroke inside the cell, affecting mitochondria. There's an interesting subject matter where vancomycin was thought to be lowering Clostridia in the autism gut, and there was a remission of autism symptoms based on the use of this antibiotic. How interesting that when they stopped using the antibiotic, it was considered that the Clostridia were growing back. That's not how I view it. Actually, there's other research showing that vancomycin actually causes mitochondria, which were once bacteria, as it's hypothesized, thousands of millions of years ago. They became part of us, the mammalian cell. So that antibiotic is affecting mitochondria to release reactive oxygen species, ROS, which can balance the cell. And when you stop using that antibiotic, that mitochondrial dysfunction can return. That's just another way of looking at the results of those famous studies. Okay, gut-brain connection and nitric oxide, another study. This is the toxic version of nitric oxide, leading to microglial activation and neurodegenerative disorders, including Alzheimer's. That's another early study being focused on in the Gut Club. Here's a couple more quick topics here. COVID-19, this is a topic of the day. It's been shown in both children and adults that it's about leaky gut. This is a pretty profound study showing in children, MISC, that's multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, being a matter of leaky gut in COVID-19. Personally, I'm a little bit afraid of what could happen now that the vaccines are being rolled out to 5 to 11-year-olds. I would like to think that natural immunity should be focused on in this group especially, and leaky gut can be focused on, and making sure that gut permeability is improved based on microbial balance. Okay, viral bacterial interaction, we talked about that. This is another photo exploration begun in November 2016. Actually, bacteria are able to regulate, the replication of viruses. There's a lot of information about that. Okay, let's wrap things up here, showing you kefir. These are our kefir grains that have been developed in France. Ketosana advanced kefir grains. They are basically a conglomeration of enriched kefir grains. They incorporate grains from all over the world and well-studied species of bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, and even protective yeasts all into one grain. And we're marketing these things on thegutclub.org. If you're interested, they can be purchased. They offer, for just $30, it's like a lifetime supply of probiotics because they are reusable. Generation after generation, you can hand them down to your grandchildren, they can still be using them. Okay, that's kefir grains. And lastly, this is a photo about kefir and how it becomes lactobacillus dominant when fermenting 48 hours. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share and show you my children's book if anyone's interested. Oh. I wonder what it's like to be a raindrop, the rain-making bacteria, if you want to read this to your kids. It's about planetary health based on microbial balance. It actually takes microbes in the clouds. You can actually have constipated clouds leading to a drought based on microbial balance in the clouds. Fascinating. Okay, that's, actually, I shouldn't chuckle. Constipation is an issue I take very seriously. Greens and kefir could be number one helpful items to address constipation. It's a huge issue. I learned about it the hard way because I knew that when our dog 11 years ago was constipated one day, there would be seizure activity the next day.
It's incredibly, I could sit here and just listen to you talk because there's like you're saying, there's so much information. And I was just thinking about this, like each link that you offered, I literally would just like you to have like a 30-minute discussion on each. And I know we don't have, that much time, but you should consider doing that because I really would love to just go even deeper into each one of these links and each one of these papers that you're talking about, just to see exactly like what's going on, just from, it's crazy. It's so much information.
It's crazy. There's just too much to wrap your head around. Yeah. Yeah. I just talked for an hour. I hope I didn't bore everyone to tears, but there's, it's pretty important stuff, I think.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's almost like we had to speed through just, to kind of tell people about it. But I'm hoping maybe we'll speak to Enrique and we'll add some links so people can delve a little bit deeper. But consider that, do some like deep dives yourself and just explain it to all of us lay people. We've had some great questions come across. So I wanted to chat with you about that. And I was writing some things down myself.
Okay.
Just because we were just talking about kefir, I just wanted to touch on that for a second. So the kefir grains coming from France, that's interesting to me. So how does that, because kefir obviously is either made like with milk or it's made with water. How does that work with people who might have either histamine issues or even like, let's say, casein issues? Have you run across that at all? Is that still appropriate for those type of people?
Yeah, but as I mentioned earlier, you have to start with very low doses. In the GAPS diet book, Natasha Campbell McBride suggests beginning with only a tablespoon. That's it's a very low dose. You want to avoid an adverse reaction, of course.
Absolutely.
And I think dairy. I grew up saying kefir. Outside of Chicago, where I grew up, is the Lifeway kefir company. But I learned a few years ago you're supposed to say kefir. I still kind of wince inside when I say that. But anyway, let's just say, you say kefir, I'll say kefir. That way we'll confuse
Okay.
everyone.
So we can just
But
iron it out.
you know, the idea is to begin with very low doses. And traditional kefir made with kefir grains is a completely different animal than the ones you buy in a store. They're using probiotic powders. But I was going to say dairy kefir. I think has greater therapeutic benefit than either water kefir or even using things like nut milks, which you can do. And you can use coconut milk to make kefir. But I think there are some benefits to using whole milk. I like to use grass-fed whole milk.
Okay, yeah, and that's kind of what Alex was touching on a little bit. He was talking about kefir and then Lactobacillus. So obviously, I'm assuming that you're going to get more bang for your buck doing, like you said, grass-fed milk as opposed to water or coconut to increase that Lactobacillus.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay,
And those
so
milk fats might protect the bacteria from gastric acid. We need to, and when to take your probiotics is another thing. Maybe right after the meal is going to be better than before. That's the current trend in thought. So
Okay.
your gastric acid is lower, and the bacteria have a fighting chance of surviving.
That's interesting. That's great advice.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to go through some questions. We also had Alex talking about, and I thought this was great, best suggestions for reducing proteobacteria.
Well, boy, let me take a sip of this hibiscus tea made with a lot of freshly sliced ginger. Ginger has a ton of synergy, by the way. That's the ginger commercial. Synergy with lactobacillus. There's a fairly new prebiotic called 2FL, which it's sold under the name Hologos. I don't have personal experience with it, but according to the literature, it will raise bifidobacteria and lower proteobacteria. It's the main human milk oligosaccharide, HMO, in breast milk. Now you can buy it. So that's a good way. Probably the other best thing you can do is just not eat sugar, keeping sugar out of your diet.
Perfect.
To lower proteobacteria.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful.
And also things like to be anti-adhesion. E. coli overgrowth can explain symptoms in a lot of problems. So, these polyphenols combined with bee propolis. There's one study that's really interesting. Cranberry was potentiated with bee propolis, which is made by bees mainly to be antifungal, but there are also these flavonoids, the polyphenols, as part of bee propolis that somehow help with anti-adhesion for E. coli. D-mannose is another thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What are your thoughts? I mean, because when we talk about things like, bee propolis, and we talk about even like ginger, and we talk about green tea, and we talk about all these great things that are for the gut. But I guess, there are some people that try to go, I mean, like you're saying, it's such an important aspect to be really like healthy, eating good foods, things that are good for your body. But when you're trying to really alter your microbiome, what are your thoughts on food, just using food as medicine, which is very important. But is effective enough? Or do you need to kind of go into those, really hit it harder with something that's more concentrated, like a supplement?
Or do you need to use the biggest gun of all, which is FMT? These days, I wouldn't shy away from it. If I could go back in time, I would have strapped that dog up immediately and against her will, given her an FMT. But diet is really important. Fasting is another tool. Intermittent fasting, shifting flora. Shout out to Dr. Mindy Peltz, who does a lot of great work educating people about fasting and focuses on microbial balance as being one of the most important mechanisms behind fasting. There's a reason that fasting is also part of religion, and it just might be raising lactobacillus to raise oxytocin in the brain and have a better connection to the outside world.
That's a good point. Very good point. Very hard, obviously, to do with like very young children. It's hard to do, a fasting, but it's a very good point. For maybe like for the older kids, even for adults, if they can do that, it's a great idea.
Yeah, but the elimination diets seem pretty risky to me. I mean, the carnivore diet might be great for a week, but ongoing, you're not feeding a lot of your good bacteria. There's a lot of controversy behind this. But I used to be more of a fan of, like maybe a month-long paleo style diet. But, and now I still am as a matter of detox. But nothing's more important than diet. All these supplements in the world, and I've got a long list and a lot of things I do myself. If I'm going to eat ice cream, that ruins everything.
Yeah, I hear you. And one of the first questions we had, because we did kind of touch on, with your dog that was sick, that had seizure activity, was FMT. Now, obviously, FMT has been very, we have the amazing Dr. Adams, who has shown phenomenal results with his golden poop, as we like to call it. But at the same time, of course, there's those people out there that are, having, there's a lot of clinics, there's a lot of people that are trying to do maybe at-home FMTs, which have been helpful to some other people. What are your thoughts on? I know you are very pro FMT. So what are your thoughts on FMT for people that are really kind of looking in that direction?
You know what? Let me share a page if I can. Might be hard now because I have too many windows open, but I've got a page on the gutclub.org called FMT Breastfed Baby Poop Donor Project. And I've got this crazy idea years ago. I had this idea that making breastfed baby poop capsules, for top-down FMT, this is well before I started the Gut Club, could be considered the most important untapped medicine on earth. Someone told me that was a Nobel Prize winning idea, worthy idea. I don't know anyone that's tried that. Breastfed baby poop could be a good donor material. It could be less risky than using adult poop. When it's combined with, when it's a breastfed infant, according to one paper that's also on solid food, that's when the butyrate producing Clostridia flourish. So you have this great combination of Bacteroides, which are also, fed by breast milk. You have the high bifidobacteria and Lactobacillus. You have the butyrate producers, all part of baby poop. And to think that FMT history in both, China and also Korea, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, was basically the equivalent of a poo-poo milkshake. There's also this Korean wine. It's a fermented poop wine using children's poop. So I'd like to think that this could catch on. So anyone who's interested, check out thegutclub.org, FMT Breastfed Baby Poop Donor Project. And I've got a list, of the things that make breastfed baby poop possibly the best donor material. Another reason are healthy phages. These are healthy viruses that control bacterial populations. And it just so happens that these phages outnumber bacteria early in life. Later in life, the bacteria take over.
Yeah, I mean, I know I obviously follow the Gut Club. I love all the research that you and some amazing people you have on there that are doing. We would love to see, I know it's been out for a little bit for the baby poop, FMT kind of project. So maybe after a certain amount of time, we can talk to Enrique, get you back on, and let's see if there's some data with some, we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, there's only one study I've found so far where they did use infant poop, and they used one. It was a case study where one infant was breastfeeding but not on solid food, but the other one was on solid food, and that donor material was more effective. That's that's what I was considering. I was happy to find some proof of it.
Yeah, I would love to know more about that. Here's a great question that I had actually written down, but Roxana, she wrote it perfectly. Talking about butyrate, does oral supplementation with butyrate reach the large intestine, or is it absorbed in the small intestine? And I've been doing some research about this too. And of course, you have these supplements that claim that they're the only ones, that go into the large intestine. What are your thoughts?
Well, that was brought up in the stool test discussion group too, and I had to dig to find the latest research that did show that there was benefit in both the small intestine and the colon. Whether or not it's just reverberating there or actually reaching the colon is another story. I'm not sure there's proof of that. But the fact that it did help microbial balance in both places. And, we should also back up. I should have said early on that these stool tests, they aren't necessarily indicative of what's going on in the small intestine, by the way. I think that probably goes without saying, but anyway, I just wanted to mention it.
No, it's a great point.
It's fecal matter.
Yeah.
So, but I would say that it probably is getting there, getting to the colon. I mean, it's getting into circulation, even if it's just being absorbed in the small intestine. I think it eventually probably reaches the colon too. I have to dig a little. It's a great question, but I was happy to find some evidence that it does make a difference in both the colon and small intestine.
Yeah, I'd love to see more information on that for sure. I know that you, on the Gut Club, there is a great Butyrate supplement that I know people have been using. I think it's called Tributyrin X. We actually use that. I like it. So, and it's just hard. It's hard to figure out, like, with all the this is the best one. This is the best one. Which one is the best one? So,
yeah.
But we've liked this one so far.
Well, sodium butyrate is probably the more popular one, and I've seen some anecdotes where people switched to tributyrin and it worked better than for them. So maybe it's worth trying both. And also, again, you have to start with low dose, because with tributyrin, it's been known, and I'm not sure about sodium butyrate, but people can get constipated from using too much in the beginning. Okay. And I tried to dig into the mechanism for it and found some evidence that it's actually speeding up tryptophan movement. There's another word for it. I can't think of it right now. And, considering serotonin levels, that, tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. And in constipation, you have low levels of serotonin in the gut, high levels in diarrhea. Maybe that's the mechanism for how taking a butyrate supplement can lead to constipation. Just be careful and start small. I've been testing it myself just out of curiosity. It's also supposed to be really good for sleep, and there's science behind that. Another thing I really like as a supplement that's not really so popular for gut application is hyaluronic acid. And that's also good for leaky gut, according to the latest science. We also promote sulforaphane. That's the derivative of broccoli sprouts. I mentioned that earlier. And there's a brand that we're an affiliate for called Enduracell. That's on thegutclub.org. But again, start with very small doses, because people can have an adverse reaction to that sulforaphane. But it's probably one of the more, or if not the most, anti-inflammatory supplement you can try.
Wonderful. And yeah, I've got a couple more questions just so that we can, I know we've taken so much of your time already. And then, well, this is an interesting question. It isn't specifically about autism, obviously, but you kind of touched a little bit on like COVID-19. And so this question from Jinder is, how is COVID-19 shifting the gut microbiome? Thoughts on it being a big driver for long COVID? It's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's, according to some of the research, there's reduced protective bacteria and raised gram-negative bacteria. The immune response to a virus, almost any virus can possibly lead to that. What I find really telling is that there's not one piece of research published for COVID vaccines or any of the childhood vaccines, any data about pre or post vaccination microbiome data. There's nothing that's ever been published. So that's interesting. But yeah, anyway, it's about immune response and how the immune response shifts flora in the wrong direction. So there could be a predisposition to having the symptoms, and then the symptoms are part of an immune response that shifts flora even further in the wrong direction. It's really quite a wicked, vicious circle.
100%. Okay, and I have a question I've written down when you were talking about the B. fragilis and the paper that you had cited that reversed autism in mice. How do we increase our B. fragilis?
And also there are studies about Lactobacillus doing the same thing. I think it was Ruteri that was the one responsible.
Okay.
But how do you raise B. fragilis? I was wrestling with that myself, and I found, I had the idea that greens could do it, and sure enough, I found some evidence. That's another.
Do you have? I know you were like loving on of course now I can't remember what you were talking
arugula.
Thank you, arugula.
Yeah.
Is that more on that side, or just a variety of greens?
Well, you know what? That's a good question, but there's one study I found where green juicing was raising protective Bacteroides. So, I was trying to explain, and I still am, the WALS protocol and why it works in 50% of people who try it, and thinking about what microbes they have before they start, and what the imbalance really is in multiple sclerosis. There are contrasting studies. In some it's high Clostridia, in others it's high Bacteroides. So why would a high dose vegetable diet concentrating on greens balance? Well, it just so happens that these greens and other vegetables are feeding both sides of the aisle, both the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes. And high doses of fibers like wheat and also mushroom are known to feed Prevotella. So we talked a lot about Prevotella earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, diet is the most important thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that we do every single day anyways, is what we put in our body. So it has to be, you're either feeding, what is that saying? You're either feeding disease or you're not. So, so amazing. Lastly, I have like two more things and then I know we're going to let you go so you can go enjoy your weekend. But what is your favorite gut test? I know we were talking a little bit about how Ubiome, I think, was kicked out of the US. Interesting. But what are you liking right now?
Kicked out of the world.
Yeah. Great.
Well, you know what? The more information, the better. Some of them have their strengths. GI map, I find, is maybe the best one to test for pathogenic E. coli, but I have a hard time trusting the bigger picture view. For those, I go to BiomeSite and Thrive. I'm really impressed these days with BiomeSite's platform. They're really doing a bang up job. It's a UK based company. But either test is great, Thrive and BiomeSite, for that big picture view.
Wonderful.
But there are other tests. The Genova test has its strength, and there's Gut Zoomer out there. The more information we have, the better.
Absolutely. And also, before I forget, do you do consults through the Gut Club?
Yeah, there's the Microbiome Balancing Private Consult. It's on the gutclub.org. It's only $125 for a Zoom conference, followed up by a written report, and then some conversation after that, and by way of email. So I put about 3 hours or so into the whole project, and so I like to think it's a bargain. So yeah, the Microbiome Balancing Private Consult, if anyone's interested.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with us. I like I said, I just want more information, more and more. For anyone who is interested in getting more information and really deep diving, definitely check out the Gut Club. They're on Facebook, as well as I believe you guys have a website as well. So, and then Enrique will link all that information. Before I forget, because I forget most things, if you haven't already, doing a little bit of a promo here, my favorite, and I have to say my favorite cups right now, like my mugs. These are amazing. I ordered these actually on Amazon, and they fit as much coffee as I need in my life, which is a lot. They're really well put together. They stay hot long. These are just gorgeous mugs. And these are actually, when you purchase them, I think that Enrique will add a link, but when you purchase them on Amazon, it's from a really well-known ASD family that actually creates these, and all of the proceeds go towards the Brain Foundation, and it goes to support, it's a nonprofit organization that supports neurological disorders. And the more we can do in this field, we have a lot of people, like as Keith is saying, that are affected all over the world. And one, it's the holidays, great gift. I bought this for myself. I might buy more for myself, for other people, but it's such a great gift. It's such a great thing that is obviously usable, and it goes to support a really good foundation, which is basically us and people in our community. So,
you know what? Let me break in there. I want to thank the Autism Research Coalition, you and Enrique, and a lot of the other people that have been interviewing people. I'm just amazed that I get to be part of the program, and it's quite an honor.
No, I go a little, stage 4 clinger stalker on the Gut Club, because there's such great information coming out of there. And we love that you guys are also focusing on autism, because it is a true pandemic of now. So we really appreciate all the work that you are doing and continue to do. And if anyone's interested, definitely check out the Gut Club. Consulting is a great idea. With Keith, he has a plethora of information. So thank you so much for being with us, and we just are excited. Hopefully we have you on again soon to talk about more things.
All right, great. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Have a great, safe weekend, and